Welcome to Saltwater Reasonings. In this episode, I am joined by Archana Pathak for a conversation titled Diasporic Storying, Autoethnography as Metaphor and Method. Together, we reflect on what it means to write, think, and live from diasporic locations where belonging is shaped by movement, rupture, and repetition. Archana speaks about autoethnography as a rigorous way of staying with complexity, a practice that refuses forced closure and instead holds unansweredness as truth. We talk about story as method, about metaphor as analytic grounding, about theory as liberatory and relational practice, one that allows lived experience to be recognized as shared. This conversation honors tension, memory, and the ongoing labor of meaning making across multiple worlds. I invite you to listen slowly, to let the questions stay open, and to notice what resonates in your body as you listen. Before we get into our conversation, I want to invite you to ground us in a story, a proverb, an adage that has been really important to you as a scholar and as a human being.
Tracy, thank you so much for inviting me into conversation with you today. I am so excited to be here and so honored. This is such a wonderful gift. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I can already feel the emotion in my body, which tells me that this is a really powerful and important conversation that is coming through. So I'm really excited about that. I am going to ground us with two things. And they connect the two parts of me that I think are most salient in all of my work. One is my own history and ancestry as a South Asian, a member of the South Asian diaspora in the United States, and my grounding in my spiritual traditions of Hinduism was a nod to understanding that there are some conflicting and problematic histories there. So saying that, but still believing in the spirituality and connecting to the spirituality of that. And that is a prayer that I use all the time when I do my work. So I'll say it in Sanskrit first, and then I'll translate it. This prayer is a prayer that invokes us to move from darkness to light, from untruth to truth, and from death to continual rebirth. So it's a call to move into our truth. It's a call to move into a space of lightness and healing and justice. So it's a prayer that I use for almost everything that I do. And I tie it with Audre Lorde's words that our differences are not what divide us. It is our inability to respect, celebrate, and honor those differences. And that's the other piece of me, which is the Black feminist tradition out of the United States, which was a real grounding space for me when I was an early scholar trying to make sense of a brown body in a white country that was violent towards Black people. So those are the two pieces of me, I think, that I'm always kind of navigating.
I want to thank you for that invocation. It's beautiful and layered, and it resonates with what draws me to you as a human being and as a scholar. Your understanding that this word is just this word, and your refusal to be separate pieces and parts when you do this work is that recognition of the whole, but all its complexities, as you hinted at. Yeah, the way in
Very
which
much so.
you show up as this whole person. And that is such a joy to experience in academia. As a diasporic scholar and thinker, as a feminist, a lot of your work is around autoethnography. I want to ask, how has migration and return shaped your intellectual life?
That's such an amazing question. I think that the journey between home and location is more than a physical movement, right? So I often say that as we traveled across across the ocean, through the air, however my family traveled, some of my family came by steamer, some of them, took flights to come to the United States, that we carried with us all of the pieces, good and bad, right, of our lived experiences at home And we attempted to locate them within the framework and the context of the location in which we live. And those ideas of home and location are so amorphous. They are both physical, intellectual, emotional, psychic realities for us. And so there's no way for me to think about myself without thinking about all of the ways in which I am situated
Yeah.
through this journey, and how that journey keeps echoing through my body, through my psyche all the time. So my parents invoke their Indianness in all kinds of ways, and it sort of impacts me in certain ways. And then I have my own sense of Indianness, which impacts me and them. And then my sister, who was born in the United States, right, has a different journey around that. And so our migrational generation, right, then becomes another layer to that. So I think it's almost impossible to have the conversation of diaspora without a conversation about migrational generation.
Yeah. And without a conversation about storying and stories, um, so much of your
Yes,
work is grounding in autoethnography, and just the power of coming from a oral tradition, a tradition in which ritual and story are connected in spiritual practice, in walking practice, life practice. I often think that sometimes for diaspora people, it's tempting to romanticize the complexity of our histories and our communities. How have you grappled with that?
sure. So in my work, one of the things I do is theorize that concept of that romanticizing, and I call it frozen in time memory. And the concept of frozen in time memory is the way in which the members of the diaspora, when they travel to the new location that will ultimately become home, right? We're gonna always kind of move between this home location kind of dynamic. When they travel to that place, their memory is frozen. It's frozen in the time, space, and nostalgia of their recollection of life prior to that transition. So the South Asian diaspora in the United States, for example, the post 1965 migrant generation, which is my parents' generation, those who were allowed to enter the US after the changing of the law in 1965 that reopened Asian migration into the United States, right? It had been closed in 1924 from the what was called the Chinese Exclusionary Act, which was later advanced to the Johnson-Reed Act, which closed down immigration or very narrowly limited immigration from Asia. And then in 1965, that was reversed. And so when that population came over, and then they experienced all of the like very, I think, psychically traumatic reality of no longer being of the privileged group, right? Because primarily the folks who immigrated at that time were upper caste or Savarna caste of the top castes, right? Highly educated, relatively urban populations. So they went from being the elite of their society and they became just brown people in America, which was grappling with a post-civil rights reality. And so the memory, right, of India and home kind of got romanticized. Like that's where they felt like they belonged. They had family, like they remembered all the positive things about family structure. They remembered all of the sort of feeling of belongingness, the feeling of support, the ease with which their life existed. Okay. And the difficulties of their lives back home sort of diminished or fell into the background because the difficulties of American life were right in front of them. And that then becomes this encapsulated frozen memory. And then that's what they then will articulate to their next generations. And they'll talk about what it means to be Indian through this very calcified, strategically recalled experience of their lives.
And it feels like also a layer of protection and safety as well, this connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not necessarily motivated by anything manipulative. I think it becomes that at some point in future generations, but that's not the original intent. The original intent is really um, a way of grounding themselves, building resilience for themselves up against the face of discrimination and racism in the United States, um, and a way of finding strength to keep moving forward in a land that really played with their emotions. They were both, in some ways, they were exalted because they were not Black, right? Toni Morrison said in 1988, when Time magazine interviewed her, she said, Asian immigrants coming into the United States have been taught one lesson, and that is distance yourself from Blacks. And she said, that's not maybe said out loud, but it's definitely a big part of the model minority narrative, right? And there's a bit of like, it's kind of like it's an abusive relationship, right? The relationship we have with our colonizer is like an abusive romantic relationship, isn't it? Like, they on one hand give us these acts of love, like, we love your diversity, and you know you're an important part of our country, and they're really kind in certain ways to South Asians because it's their foil, it's the fulcrum against which they can engage in anti-Blackness, right? But they don't really, we're not white. So that
Yes,
fulcrum is simply a fulcrum. Like, they will easily turn on us as well. Like, so it's kind of like, wait, I'm a good immigrant, aren't I? But at the end of the day, I'm still going to face discrimination, right? And so the model minority narrative is a real kind of, it really messes with the mind in a certain kind of way. The frozen in time memory, it was a protection, I think. It was a way of saying, I know who I am. I remember a place and a space and a time in which I was valued. And I have the resources in my heart and in my spirit of resistance and resilience and success. Right? Because you also have to remember that those post 1965 immigrants were also children of independence. They were all young children when India gained independence from Britain. And so for example, my father was 10 when India became independent. So he has that cellular memory of living under the British Raj, even though he wasn't quite old enough for the whole story. His older siblings they were teenagers. They were part of an independence fight. They were part of the movement, right? But he remembers his parents being part of the movement. And my mother too, right? She was maybe just a year old, right? When India gained independence. But I think that lives in our body.
yeah,
So they
absolutely.
come here and they came to the US, and then it was like, this is how we know we can survive this. We have done it before and it will be okay. So yeah, I think frozen in time memory starts as a very, very much a protective space. But as time passes, it becomes something else when you're navigating raising children.
So you're coming into a space with this very strong connection to home. And you're in also this diverse space with its own politics. And I'm thankful that you brought up that Toni Morrison quote, and we have similar things in the Caribbean as well. This whole idea of dividing and ruling, and constantly being taught to the other person. Yeah. So, and it also creates a level of distrust. So you're coming into all of that, and you come into the academy. How did you connect with autoethnography as a means of doing research? What was the connection there for you?
That's a great question. My training is in communication studies, and so I started studying intercultural communication. I was ecstatic. I was young in my undergraduate career, and I found intercultural communication, and I thought, oh my gosh, finally somebody who talks about how communication is impacted by cultural difference. And
Mm.
this was like the story of my life, right? I didn't, I've always said that my work is shaped by the question I have asked myself since I was a child, which is, there has to be someone else like me out there. Where are they? Who are they? Right? Because as the child of immigrants, and what we call 1.5 generation, 1.5er, right? I was born there, raised here.
Yeah.
I didn't understand Indianness the way my parents did, They were like, we're Indian. What's the problem? And I was young. I was racializing in America. So I understood Indianness as a heritage and as a part of me and as a part of my early memory, right? Like I felt it in my body, was very deeply connected to it and had a lot of memory of my early childhood. But I was also racializing in America. I was navigating US race politics every day as a young child, right? In a white school where 3 of us were not white, right?
Wow.
Like I had to navigate that. But I also had a very different experience than my sister, who was like, India is a concept. It's home, it's a heritage, but she wasn't born there. She traveled there at various times in her life. But and she feels very Indian. But for her, she feels that through a conceptual and ideological reality, right? Like from the memory of my parents. It's not in her body in the ways that it's in my body, simply because of where we were born. And so when I found intercultural communication, I was just really excited. I was like, oh, finally, I get to think about and write about and talk about this weird experience that I live every day. But intercultural communication was very positivistic at the time. It was mostly quantitative method. And they kept saying to me, well, it's really hard to study the Indian subcontinent because you have too many languages and you can't back translate the surveys. So I was like, what are you talking about? Like, if you want to talk about culture, you got to talk about these people. And so that didn't work. And then I went into my master's program and I got introduced to ethnography. And I was like, okay, here we go. Now we can tell the stories. And this is great. And I'm very excited. And I started doing ethnographic work in the community. And that became really fraught because when I went into the community and started doing interviews and started doing field observations, the community had an expectation of me that I would represent the community in a particular way.
Right.
And that became very confusing. And I was like, I'm not just going to say what you want me to say about us, right? Like I have to look at this from a larger global framework. And it became very fraught. And so I didn't know what to do or where to go. And autoethnography this was in the 90s when I was doing that. And autoethnography was just starting. And I realized that who I was and where I was located was inextricably intertwined with all of my ethnographic work. That what I experienced as an ethnographer was completely framed through my body. That's true for everybody, but it was really confounding what I was seeing. And so when autoethnography came around, Sarah Almira de la Garza at the time had written Maria Speaks, her book on being a Chicana and her autoethnographic book on being a Chicana. I read that and I thought, this is what I need to be doing. I need to be talking about me and the way in which I'm the text, right? In the ethnographic space, in all of these intercultural spaces, I am text, and that's how I've had to be. And so that's how I came to autoethnography. And I really just taught myself.
How did you give yourself permission to do that? Especially when you're coming into it from a very quant space, very positivist space, ethnography, which is already all the way out there. How did you give yourself permission to say, I'm the text? Or did you feel, was it deliberate or did it happen naturally?
I think I was compelled. I had no choice. Everything I wrote felt incomplete. I tried to write. It was through failure, to be honest. Like I just couldn't produce scholarship because it just wasn't rigorous to me.
Yeah.
Because something was not being written, right? Something was missing. And so I don't know that I gave myself permission. It wasn't like, oh, I'm finally like, oh, I get to do this. I'm free. It was way more about, if I'm going to produce scholarship, it has to have rigor to it. Right. And I don't mean rigor in the quantitative sense. I mean that legitimacy, that depth of complexity and understanding. And so it's taken me a very long time. If you think about it from a scholarly perspective, it's just taken me a really long time to get to the place where I can write that, have written it, and have put it out into the world. I think it is in the just right time. But if you think about it from a scholarly perspective, everything I was writing I would have questions about it. I would say, well, I think I'm missing a piece in this essay, or this isn't as clear as it could be, or I'm saying things, but I don't know that I completely agree with that argument the way that I framed it. So,
Yeah.
and so I didn't have a choice. Maybe I should say that.
The idea that one of the criteria of rigor for you was very much internal. There was an internal truth. Like, even if you were checking boxes, even if they were qualitative boxes, there was a box that wasn't checked before. And so what made it rigor was that resonance with this internal this internal sense that this work was right, yeah, that I had to write this work the right way, which is
That's
beautiful.
right.
When you talk about coming to this point and you talk about the diaspora here, themes around rupture, loss, longing, belongingness. How do story and metaphor help you capture and express that in a way that conventional research just can't?
So I think the thing that is most fundamental for me, germinal for me, is that as I articulate diasporic autoethnography in my text that I'm working on now, in the manuscript that I have in progress, where I both put forth a methodology of diasporic autoethnography and metaphor as method, is that diasporic autoethnography is written in a way in which the complications are purposefully left unanswered because they are not answered for the community, right? That's a very Western framing where we have to pose a question and provide a solution or response. And for me, one of the things I came to grips with was that for those of us in the diaspora, the questions never completely get answered. And that's part of what it means to live in multiple worlds at the same time. So the questions get asked over and over again, and the answers are different in different contexts, in different ways, and for different reasons. And so to come up and to say, here's the question and here's the answer is limiting and inaccurate, right? And so that's a big piece of what it means to do diasporic autoethnography, is to stay in the complexity, to hold still in the unansweredness of our realities.
And trust that we can hold it.
Yeah. We have to hold it. We have to hold the tension. We do. It's not even that we have to. It's just that that's how we live our lives,
Yeah.
in that place of tension. So why not then write it that way? Why give in to a resolution of tension that doesn't actually exist in our lived experience, And then metaphor allows us to ground our analysis in the cultural frameworks that most importantly shape us. So, for example, in my manuscript, I use the Hindu temple as my metaphor because that space has a logic to it that is a real logic that I live with, right? And so instead of applying an external logic on top of a lived experience that doesn't actually apply, instead of trying to fit that square peg into a round hole, metaphor allows us to say, okay, here's a logic, here's a cultural logic that's sense making, and it's going to help me, do that critical engagement with the story.
Let us dive into metaphor as method and this manuscript that you're
Okay,
working on. And it's
sure.
excitement. Excitement.
Yeah,
So you spoke just now about
very
the
excited.
temple. So excited. You spoke just now about the temple being the metaphor as an example. About, you know, the word metric just feels so positivist to put on it, but as a means of holding and understanding the experience. Talk us through a little bit about this text, how you are using metaphor to hold just the complexity of our stories.
I've been working on this text for a long time. Going back to your earlier question, like when did I give myself permission to do autoethnography? I've been trying to make this text come to life for a while, and it's finally there. Part of that is recognizing that I had to. It's 2 manuscripts. I was trying to put it all into one, and I couldn't. I couldn't get it to fit. And so Dr. Bhattacharya and I had some great conversations, and she sort of pushed me and she said, you have more than one book here.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, please. I can hardly get this one written. And but she said it and she planted that seed in my head. And it was on a Thursday. She said that to me. I usually go to a coffee shop on Saturday morning and just sit and write for as many hours as I can. I sat down and I couldn't get past that idea. And I opened up my computer and I just started a blank document. And I said, and the title of the document was, "What if it is 2 books?" And it just sort of laid itself out as 2 different texts. And so I was like, okay, it's 2 books. Great. But part of that was because I had to do the methodological work. I had to lay that out. So the first text is the articulation of the methodology of diasporic autoethnography and metaphor as method, and some of the actual doing of that around gender in the South Asian diaspora. And then the second book is on diasporic belonging. And that will be a fuller text that uses metaphor as method all the way through to look at race, class, caste. So all of the pieces will continue into the second book. So I use the temple metaphor. And the thing about the temple metaphor is it allows me to take cultural practice that is where meaning making happens in my community and show how I have engaged with that process of meaning making and use it to engage in iterative meaning making from a theoretical perspective. And so the temple space is the metaphor. So in Hindu temples, there are 3 primary spaces and a 4th component. And I use those 3 spaces and the 4th component. And that actually is the structure of the book. So when I have autoethnographic story, I move it through those 3 spaces. So the first space is the Garbhagriha, which is the space, the innermost sanctum where the deity is, and it's very sacred. And so that's our most internal, vulnerable self, right? And it's sort of the seat of the spirituality in a certain sort of way. And then right outside of that is the Pradakshina part, which is the space right outside of where the deity is housed. And in Hindu tradition, we walk around the deity. We circumambulate the deity as a way of taking in the energy of the deity, right? From all sides. But it's a circling of contemplation and worship. And so that is the space of analysis, right? And I talk about how I have lived in the Pradakshinapat most of my life. I've spent most of my life circumbobulating around my lived experiences and trying to make meaning of them, right? And then the third space is the mandap. It's the community space of the temple. So when you step outside of where the deities are housed, there's this wide space where community gathers. They often sit there for what we would in English language call a sermon, but in Sanskrit we would call satsang, community conversation. But it's a space that mutates. So during prayers, it's for satsang, but between prayers, it's often a community gathering space where children are running around and playing. It's also the same space where we offer our food and people have meals. And so it's the space of social theorizing, right? So that's the grand theory that's where I engage then theoretically, where I'm talking about gender and power dynamics in a culture, right? That's at that sort of large cultural space. So those are the 3 spaces of the temple. And then the 4th component is prasad. And no temple experience is complete without prasad. And this is a word that some people know what it means, but not everyone does. And it really just means offering. And it's always food. So usually food. And so most temple visits mean you take prasad, you take some fruit or something you've made at home and you give it to the priest who offers it to the deities that represent God. And then it's then given back. But at that point, it's considered prasad. And so then it's given back and the community feasts on that. And so the book is Prasad. It's an offering to the community of a meaning making of their lived experiences. So it's what I bring to the temple space, and hopefully it returns to the community in a way that nourishes them. So that's the metaphor.
So does this, so I'm imagining that it's a Saturday morning and you're in the cafe and you're doing all of this writing and things are coming together. You said it took you a while to do this, but it sounds like it's methodology, but it's this lived methodology. Does it feel like an ancestral download? Do you feel like you're pulling from spiritual practice? Like, how does it come together for you?
So it's a both and.
Yeah.
It's an integrative reality, right? It's absolutely ancestral practice, right? The oral tradition and the meaning making and the idea of leaning into contemplation as a way of meaning making for a community definitely comes from my ancestral roots. And I then become an agent of what it means to bring that into contemporary space.
Who are you writing for?
I'm writing for my community.
Yeah.
I write for my community.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
When you say I write for my community, how does that feel in your body? I'm watching you now. You're like, I write for my community.
It's like that is liberating. That is liberating. When I stopped writing for the academy, when I stopped writing to prove an intellectual rigor, when I stopped writing for the Western voice, I think that was the true point of liberation for me. And when I say I'm writing for my community, that also means I'm rooting my writing in a spiritual practice of nishkam karma, and nishkam karma is action without expectation. So my dharmic path, right? My true north is that I have to speak what is true, and then what happens with that is not my business, right? And so writing for my community is about saying, this is what I know needs to be said, right? That's ancestral too, right? Like this is why I was put on, like, I have to leave this place better than I found it. When I came into this world, I came into this world with a path about doing right and doing just. So, but then whether that gets taken in or whether people believe me or agree with me, that's not relevant. That's not why, and I think that's a big piece of my own spiritual practice. So I'm compelled to write it and then let it be. So that's what I mean about writing for my community.
So I was curious. I always think about autoethnography as a vulnerable practice. And sometimes there's a tension between that vulnerability and, you're still exercising some authority over content, over area. I was going to ask about the tension between those two things, but as you speak, I'm thinking, yes, it's vulnerability, but if I'm writing for my community, vulnerability is not the same as if I'm writing for the academy, because you're writing for your people. It feels different. When I hear it, I wonder what that means to you or how that resonates for you.
In some ways, it's even scarier. It's scary
Let's talk
because
about
I'm laying
that.
bare.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm laying bare. I'm laying bare the complexities and juxtapositions of who we are, right? I'm laying bare my failures as a member of the community, as well as my successes, right? I am utterly flawed as a member of my community. That's part of what it means to be in the diaspora, right? We're continuously flawed. I'm never Indian enough. I'm never American enough, right? The working title of my second book is Too Much and Not Enough on diasporic belonging. And I think that's a big piece of it. So in some ways, it's even scarier, but it's more worth it, right? So to be scared to write for the academy wasn't always worth it because I didn't know what it was. I was writing for for an entity that didn't want to see me anyway, right? In this case, I know that whatever that fear is, whatever the judgment is that may or may not come, whatever, whatever people do with my vulnerability, it will have value because I want my community to grow and to grow into its own authenticity in every way possible. So then it's worth it, right? Now being scared is okay, right? Now being vulnerable is okay. Being scared and vulnerable for an academy that's going to chew me up and spit me out anyway, what's the point
Never
of that?
claim you anyway. Never gonna claim you. It's
That's right.
fighting for belonging. Whereas your right to be a community, there is already belonging. But it's also complicated. So I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about how we navigate some of those complexities and in line with the notion of not romanticizing. There's some things in our sacred traditions. I know for me, that's definitely problematic, and you want to write about it, but you don't want it to be criticized in certain places because not everybody has the right to be critical of practices. How are you navigating that?
I'm going to be honest. I just tell myself to not think about that stuff and first write it. Like, I just have to. I have to like shut that voice off. But like,
Yeah.
I talk about my spiritual practice so much in my writing, but I also have to and will and do talk about the fact that I can talk about spiritual practice in Hinduism because I'm of the upper caste.
Well,
And that comes with its own violence towards other people of my own community. So I have to, that tension is in all the writing, right? Like this is the thing that is so much a place of safety and salvation for me. And it's also a place of caste violence. And I have to own that. And I have to think through that. And I have to talk about that. So like
yeah.
I can't escape that. It's nerve-wracking to write that because what I don't want is, non-South Asians primarily to read this and be like, oh yeah, see, that's how they are. It's like, but
Yeah.
I can't do anything about that. Like they're going to make those arguments about our community no matter what. Like my book isn't making that happen. That's just there already. So you just have to kind of find your way through. And at the same time, I'm also putting myself out there in a really raw way where my community is going to say, you're not really a good Hindu or you're not really a good member of our community. And I'm going to have to be okay with that too.
Yeah. And you're approaching this work as a feminist writer as well. And some of the gender
Yeah.
tensions are thick,
Yeah.
deep and wide.
Well, I'm positive.
Yeah.
I'm positive they're going to disagree with me, right? But that's okay. That's my purpose, right? I have to do this. I have to do this because I have nieces and nephews and nibblings who come after me, the children of my community who are doing everything they can to live into their most authentic selves. And that's what matters, right? Helping the community find language for being their most authentic selves.
It sounds as though you're naming a lot of silences as well. It has to be real. You're naming the silences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to name it to tame it. We have to name it to be able to sit with it. And I feel brave and big and scary and necessary.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. And
Very much so.
and when you speak, I hear how that work is contributing to liberation, to justice, moving the needle. And there's only so much you can do. There's someone I sat with recently who spoke to me. This is Esther Amma, and she writes about emotional inheritance. African people and people of the African diaspora, and she talks about running our leg, our generational leg, and this idea that there's only so much that we can do in this leg, but you have to get really committed about what you're going to contribute while you are running this leg. And when you speak about your work, I hear you running the leg. This is my leg.
Yeah, I think that's that's what Nishkam Karma is for me, right? Like I'm here to do this work. What happens from it, where it takes us, what it does for the community, I need to just leave that alone.
Yeah.
That will get taken care of. I just focus on my part, do my part.
Yeah. How are you caring for yourself while you do this work? I asked the question. Some hard stuff we're doing here.
um, caring for myself inconsistently, um, I'm I am so fortunate. I'm so fortunate to have incredible intellectual community, personal community, social community, spaces where I get to be my most authentic self and it is embraced. And that is I think my number one care mechanism is to, when I don't know where else to turn or what else to do, to throw myself into those communities, right? And to be in those spaces and just be. The other thing that I am learning to do, which many people may not see as care, because I think we confuse care and indulgence a lot.
Mhm.
And that is that I am allowing myself the spaces of silence in ways that I never have in my life, which means really being with myself, keeping quiet all the other voices so that the voices that are in my mind, so that the story comes through without any interference. Part of allowing ourselves to break away from the colonial academic framework, right, is to then step into a silence, which can feel lonely and scary because I'm not running around talking to all my colleagues all the time, and I'm not like trying to show up in the academic spaces in ways that we are trained to show up in those spaces. Like talking to you, I'm talking about the book. I'm willing to share all these ideas and thoughts because this is a sacred and safe space in which I know I am heard. I'm not talking about my work in this way with my colleagues, right? I'm not doing that kind of academic performance, right? I tell people, yeah, I'm working on a book, and I just kind of leave it. I don't want to go into details, right? And that's a big shift for me because I'm trained in higher education in the United States. It's like you're supposed to go to conferences, you're supposed to, give presentations on this, you're supposed to like tell people what you're working on. I'm just like I say the least,
Yeah,
right? In those spaces. And then I sit with myself. I have a tendency to tell my story and then I'm like, oh, it's already out there instead of writing it. So I had to really learn to say, tell yourself, which means get it on the page.
yeah.
And so I think that's the other piece of care where I say to myself, okay, everybody needs to leave me alone. And it's just me and my work. And sometimes that looks like sitting in front of the computer and writing. Sometimes that looks like doing laundry in my house and just talking to myself. Yeah.
One of the times that I feel like I have been able to write the most and think the most and get clear on the most followed a period of just kind of being in exile. So when you started talking about silence, and it felt like being exiled, and I had experienced some ruptures that kind of forced me to sit with myself, and I sat with myself in academic spaces in particular. And I realized that I was hearing so much, and it's been very
Yes.
liberating. Said that I resonate with that a lot, and just how academic performance can become, because you can never perform enough. Your performance will never be stellar.
No, never,
So you're
never, never.
constantly working and just giving yourself permission, giving yourself just like, no, I'm not doing it. And so much came from sitting with that. Yeah, so that reached me in a way, in a very beautiful way. I feel like so much of your work is carrying theory and method. So what fascinates me, it's
Hmm.
theory and it's method. And you're carrying all of that with story, with praxis, with religious and spiritual praxis as well. It also feels like several crossings. When you describe the temple, like I'm walking through it with you, and I'm seeing how everything that's symbolic is meaningful and is meaningful on several layers and several levels. Does it feel rhythmic to you? Does it feel like does it move like that for you?
It does. It does. I think that, I have learned to embrace the fact that the layers is just a part of what it means to live in the diaspora, to be of the diaspora. We are
Yeah,
layered, we are complex, we are contradictory.
yeah.
We are complicated. To finally be able to embrace that and put it into the writing and say, not going to answer I'm not going to answer the question you think should be answered. That is the answer.
Is that something you needed to unlearn? Because I'm curious about what have you had to unlearn to write this kind of work?
A little bit was unlearning. A lot of it was just not even knowing. Like, I only realize that I've left questions unanswered when other people read it and they say to me, I love that you don't answer this question. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I won't,
That was my plan
because
all
I'm
along.
just writing. Yeah, that was the plan all along. Sure. I planned it. But that's what it means to be of the diaspora, right? So I write it, to use one of the qualitative method term, like I write to saturation, right? And so when
Love
the
it.
argument is saturated,
Love
right?
it.
And in autoethnography, our writing is the method. So there's a point of saturation where I'm like, this is done. This story is told, right? In its fullest.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily see that I've stopped before a place that other people want me to stop.
Yeah.
But when my readers look at it and they're like, huh, you kind of left us. I was like, I did? Well, that's where I live. So live with me there.
I love that. As we start to close, Archana, I want to, you opened up by anchoring us and grounding us in a prayer. And as we work towards closing, what does it mean to live autoethnography as both research, survival, and meaning making?
I found home, right, for myself in allowing myself to be analytical about my lived experiences. That's what made them meaningful for me. So I've had a lot of different experiences, some of them beautiful and wonderful and amazing, and some of them painful and sad and heartbreaking. And I needed to make sense of them through a framework that that was real for me, that was authentic for me. And for me, that was an academic voice. So the intellectual process of critique and analysis and theoretical engagement, Bell Hooks says theory is liberatory practice. And for me, it was too, right? It was very much a liberatory practice where I got to say, okay, there's a theoretical frame that gives meaning to this thing that happened to me that feels meaningless. That
Yeah.
just feel like why, I didn't love the question, why me? But I loved the question, why? Right. And being able to do that, that's what it means to live autoethnography for me. I've realized that level of analysis is how I have survived. And so it was just a natural progression into doing that as my work.
Yeah. I think about the younger you, and you said at the start, like you thought there must be other people out there who are having this
Yeah.
experience. It must be. And it feels like this is, you can say to that younger version of you, yeah, and I found them. And they're here.
Yes. Yes. I get to
Yeah.
say to her, yes, there are, and here they are. But I also get to say to her, you were right to ask why. And that's not a bad question. And it's okay. Because culturally, that wasn't really very acceptable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I feel that's just a beautiful way to close right there.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Perfect. Thank you. This has been an amazing conversation.
You are an amazing human
I'm so
being.
grateful to you. Thank you so much for opening this space, right? Like when we do this work, having spaces in which this work is honored is more important than we can even name. So thank you.
What lingers as we come to the close of this conversation? Archana reminds us that diasporic autoethnography asks us to stay with what cannot be easily answered, to hold tension rather than explain it away, to write in ways that reflect how diasporic life is actually lived across overlapping histories, spaces, and selves. We are left with an understanding of theory as a way of finding oneself in relation to others. Storying becomes method and ethic. Writing becomes accountability to community rather than performance for institutions. Metaphor matters. Unansweredness is not failure, and staying with complexity is a form of intellectual and spiritual honesty. If this conversation stayed with you, I invite you to share it, sit with it, and continue reasoning in your own ways across your own waters. Until next time.